In this video, we're going to discuss long-run costs. In the short run, a firm has a fixed level of capital and it has short-run average costs given by its short-run average cost curve, which is a cost curve that exists when you hold capital constant. In this diagram, I've illustrated three possible short-run average cost curves. Short-run average cost curve 1, SRAC1, would correspond to a small firm with a small amount of capital. Short-run average cost curve 2 is a medium-sized firm with a medium amount of capital. And short-run average cost curve 3 is a larger firm with a larger amount of capital. We can tell that short-run average cost curve 2 and 3 have more capital than short-run average cost curve 1 because their lowest average cost per unit of output occurs at a higher level of output. If you're only going to be selling a small amount of a product, you can produce that at a lower cost with a small firm. If you're going to produce a moderate level of output, a moderate or a medium-sized firm would allow you to produce that at a lower cost per unit, as in SRAC2. But if you want to produce more output, you can produce that most efficiently when you have a higher level of capital. In the long run, firms are not constrained by a given short-run average cost curve. They get to pick whatever level of capital would give them the lowest level of average cost for any given level of output. To simplify things, assume that these three sizes of the firms are the only three that this firm can choose among. If it's going to produce Q1 units of output, it would choose the level of capital that corresponds to short-run average cost curve 1 because the average cost per unit is lower with that level of capital than it would be for a medium or a large-sized firm. If the level of output expands to Q2, then it would switch to the medium-sized firm because that would allow it, again, to produce at a lower cost per unit. If the output increases to Q3, it would still stay with the medium-sized firm because that would provide lower average costs than either the small or the large-sized firms. Once it gets to an output such as Q4, though, it would be better off switching to the large-sized firm, and similarly at Q5. The basic decision rule is at any given level of output, in the long run, the firm gets to choose among all possible levels of capital, and it will always choose that level of capital that lets it produce output at the lowest cost per unit. In general, firms don't have only three possible sizes. In this diagram, I've illustrated a larger number of possible firm sizes. In particular, now there's 6 different sizes of firm, and those correspond to the sizes of firm that would be optimal if it's going to produce Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5, or Q6 levels of output. Notice in each case that of the curves that are illustrated, those are the curves that would allow you to produce at the lowest possible long-run cost at each one of those output levels respectively. That the short-run average cost curve SRAC1 is the least costly way of producing Q1, the short-run average cost curve 2 is the least costly way of producing Q2, and so forth as we move across the curve. I've also drawn in a long-run average cost curve, which is that darker blue curve here. What that curve does is it traces out the lowest level of costs that you can achieve in the long run when you're allowed to select among all the possible sizes of firms. There's actually an infinite number of possible short-run average cost curves here. The short-run average cost curve that's tangent at any given point would be the least costly way of producing that output level. Now, I've drawn the long-run average cost curve here as a U-shaped curve, but that's not because of diminishing returns. It's due to some other factors. And we should talk about those factors before we talk about what the shape of a long-run average cost curve would be. The factors that determine the shape of a long-run average cost curve are referred to as economies and diseconomies of scale. And what these refer to is how costs change when firms become larger or smaller, when the firm is able to choose all of its inputs, when it's able to change its level of capital as well as the variable inputs. Economies of scale are defined to be those factors that lower average costs as the size of the firm rises in the long run. As Adam Smith noted, specialization and division of labor allows you to produce output more efficiently when you produce at a larger scale of production. Similarly, there's some types of capital that can't be divided into small units and can only be efficiently used at a large scale of production. Diseconomies of scale are those factors that tend to raise average cost when the size of the firm rises in the long run. The main source of this is the increased cost of managing and coordinating a firm as a firm size rises. Let's suppose a person can effectively manage 20 workers. If you own a business where you have 20 employees, you can serve as a manager for that. But what happens if now you open 20 branches? Now each one of the branches will have a manager, and then you'll be managing the managers. Now let's say we go up to 400 branches. You'll have to add divisional managers, and as the firm keeps growing, the levels of management keep rising. That's a factor that tends to make costs rise as you add more and more layers of management to the firm. Constant returns to scale occur when average costs do not change as firm size changes. A number of studies done by economists found that many long-run average cost curves tend to have this sort of shape, that at low levels of output levels below point A, economies of scale tend to dominate. Then there's a relatively wide range of output where there is approximately constant returns to scale, and beyond point B, diseconomies of scale tend to dominate. Roughly speaking, what we tend to observe with long-run average cost curves is that firms that are too small that try to produce output below point A will end up having higher costs than larger firms. Firms that become too large, those that go beyond point B, would tend to have higher costs than smaller firms. What we would expect to see is that in the long run, all the surviving firms in an industry will be operating in the region where there's constant returns to scale. The type of market structure that firms will be operating in will depend on how large the output level at point A is compared to the total quantity of output demanded in the market. If A is small relative to the market quantity demanded, then we'll see a relatively competitive market with lots of firms. But if point A is relatively large compared to the quantity of output demanded in the market, then we would expect to see a relatively more concentrated industry, perhaps a monopoly or perhaps an oligopoly.